guys. So, I want to talk today about a book that might be under your radar. It's a contemporary book, and I believe I found out about this one. I think I was just like researching black contemporary books one day, and then I came across this one. This is, as you can tell by the title, Dominion by Addie C. Kitchens. The book cover is very simple, but I do like the way how it is. And I was raised Baptist, and I have mostly not good memories from that. And then when I was 12, I converted to Judeo Christianism, and when I was 25, I converted to being more esoteric or spiritual. So I have a lot of religious, spiritual experiences. And because of that, sometimes when it comes to escapism, I don't really like to explore those themes, but it really depends on how I feel. Because I love any book that has like a cult aspect, or any book that doesn't necessarily make fun of religion or spirituality, but shows both the pros and the cons of it. And I'm also currently in the middle of reading what is that book called? Go Tell It to the Mountain, or On the Mountain, by um, J- James Baldwin. I don't know why I wanted to say George Floyd. Rest in peace, George Floyd. But so I don't know. I kind of wanted to check this one out immediately. It was in my TBR jar, the little mini DIY that I did. I kind of wanted to check this one out immediately because I don't know if I want to do a compare and contrast. But as you can see, it's pretty short. I had some notes that I wrote about what I felt about this book, but I don't know where they are. So I'm just going to try to do this the best that I can. Usually when I do individual book reviews, what I like to do is give my intro, tell you guys like how I've discovered the book or what caused me to be interested in the book. I usually read the synopsis, and I'm glad that I started doing that, because what better way to understand a book than directly what the author is trying to bring across in the synopsis. I like to end on a positive note, even if I didn't really care for a book, because I simultaneously read and write. And one thing that's interesting about me, for those of you who are new here, those of you who forgot or didn't know, I finally finished my memoir earlier this year, and it took me 5 years to do it. So because I'm simultaneously a writer and a reader, I don't do like any throwing shade or being overly critical on my channel. If I do feel disgusted, or if I don't like something in a book, I'll probably be passionate about it, but I don't take things like personal. So we're gonna read the synopsis. I'm gonna talk about the cons first, and then we're gonna end on the pros. And the last thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about like my overall rating, my overall thoughts on the book. So, to woman he gave a womb, and to man he gave dominion. That's what I teach my boys, because that's what the living words say. Reverend Sabry Winfrey Jr. And by the way, I didn't know how to say this dude's first name like the whole entire book. Reverend Sabry Winfrey Jr., shepherd of the Seven Seals Missionary Baptist Church, believes in God, his own privilege, and enterprise. He owns the barbershop and the radio station, and generally keeps an iron hand on every aspect of society in Dominion, Mississippi. He and his wife Priscilla have 5 boys. The youngest, Emmanuel, is called Wonder Boy, and sometimes Manny. No one sings prettier, runs as fast, or turns as many heads, but Wonder Boy, his father, and all the structures in place that keep them on top are not as righteous as they seem to be. And when Wonder Boy is caught off guard by an encounter with a stranger, he finds himself confronted by questions he'd never imagined. His response sends shockwaves through the entire community. Priscilla and Diamond, 2 women who love these men, hear witness to their charms and hear the brunt of their choices. Through their eyes and their stories, Dominion offers an intricate, intimate view of how secrets control us, how shame stifles us, how silence implicates us, and how even love plays a role in the everyday violence and casual sins of the powerful. A brilliantly crafted black Southern family drama told with the captivating force, humor, and tenderness carried in these hearts of the women. This is the library binding, so it's kind of covering up some of the words. Addie C. Kitchen's dominion wrestles with the many brutal, sinister ways in which we are shaped by fear and patriarchy, and studies how we might yet choose to break free. So, once I read the synopsis, what hooked me on this book is okay, one lesson that I've learned over the years about writing is show not tell, and that no matter how good of a writer you are, that's a very hard thing to understand, and just knowing that your audience is going to find the Easter eggs and the references. What got my attention is the name of the church is called the Seven Seals Missionary Baptist Church, and if you know the Bible, you know in the book of Revelation, there's a lot of prophecies, there's a lot of symbolism and metaphors, but it talks about how seven seals are going to be, or seven trumpets or catastrophes are going to happen at the end of the world, which is going to signal Christ returning. So, and I know as someone who came from Baptist churches that a lot of times people, like name their churches, stuff like that. So being that this is a contemporary, I knew going in that this book was going to be very immersive. Like, it felt real. And I felt like this book was going to give me like S.A. Cosby vibes, because it's like a black southern noir with some drama. But this book like went in a direction that I really didn't think it was going to go. It really gave me Bill Cosby vibes. But let's start with the cons about Dominion. Well, Dominion is pretty much about like this glorified, looks perfect on paper minister. His wife, Priscilla's the wife, Diamond is the girl who's kind of like limerent towards Wonder. She really loves him, but in a way where it's self-sabotaging, and you really feel for her, but sometimes you get annoyed by her choices too. So it's really about like this seemingly perfect black church family, Reverend Savory Winfrey. He's like this darker skinned black man, chiseled features, not necessarily handsome, but very strong looking, and he's very charismatic. He was one of the people who was around during the early foundings of the church, and so he's built rapport. And as the synopsis says, he has a barbershop. He's very well known in the community. He does a lot of community work, very riveting sermons, things like that. So he has like the charismatic type of personality that a lot of people flock to when it comes to religion, especially when you come from a certain denomination like Baptist, where it's really all about personality and culture more than anything, and being able to judge other people. His wife Priscilla is light-skinned, and she has a hip problem. I think she's disabled and she kind of walks funny, so that's like her only, well, she perceives at first that to be her only character flaw. And she's kind of, in the beginning of the book, kind of stuck on herself. Like, she knows she's like one of the baddest bees in the church, if you can even say that in this context. And obviously, Reverend Savory has his issues behind the scenes. And I think it said that Priscilla and Savory have like 5 boys. 2 of them, like, I don't even remember their names. It was like Moshi and something else. One of the cons that I personally feel about this book is that it didn't really talk about the other siblings too much. And I know they're not the stars of the shows, but being that the book is so short, even like another 50 pages to talk more about them would have done this book very well. So one of my first cons is I didn't learn as much as I wanted to learn about the other siblings in relation to Wonder. But okay, well, I'm talking about the cons, but this is kind of stream of consciousness because I don't have my notes. I kind of like the fact that the characters were not likable, or at least in this book there is a lot of character development, but that's one of the pros. One of the things, I guess what I'm getting at is this book does a really good job of showing what it's like for people to kind of like be sheeple and to worship human beings. They're supposed to be religious, worshiping God, but they worship the Winfrey family, particularly Wonder Boy, because he's very attractive, he's very talented, he knows how to play multiple instruments like Prince. And at one point, somebody mockingly calls him DeBarge. So it's that kind of energy you're dealing with. So in this book, because it takes place in modern times, but because this book talks about the worship of human beings, it has a lot of that like light skin elevation that might be annoying at times in this book. And because this book is supposed to talk about misogyny, some of the misogynistic bits might get on your nerves, but it's okay because that's what it's supposed to do. So that might be one reason why you might not like this book. Also, if you're just very annoyed by like religious culture in general, this book is very heavy on like preachiness, not with the didactic, but preachiness literally because that's about a preacher family. um there were some points towards the end of the book where I had to suspend my disbelief for a lot of things, or like there were a lot of plot holes or things that had me scratching my head, not because it made me think as a reader, but because it wasn't discussed all the way. Like, I feel like as we see the decline of Wonder, even once I got to the end of the book, I really didn't have too much of a case on why he turned out the way how he did. I mean, all we know is his head was puffed up from an early age. He pretty much had everything he wanted. So there's like the egotism that comes from that and the patriarchy of him being a man, being 17, growing into a man. But then there's also the shadow side of that. Like, when people tell you how to act your whole entire life, you kind of have your wilding out phase because that's all you know when you do rebellious things to venture out. But not everyone who decides to wild out did the things that Wonder did. So I just feel like this book kind of got into like almost like social thriller energy towards like the middle shift of the book. And I'm okay with like mixed genres or mixed themes, but it took a turn that I really didn't think it was going to take. um and also back to like this being about, it's taking place in the South. So I didn't like how there were certain parts of this book where Black people were calling other Black people the N-word with the hard R, and I was like, what in the world is that about? I know, you know, a lot of Black people have like this internal hatred thing where they still have things from slavery that they are holding on to, but I just felt like it was very jarring and also random. But I'm a Californian, so we don't do stuff out like that out here. The scenery has changed the past decade as far as like how openly racist people are everywhere in America, but we don't do that stuff like this in California. At best, we'll call each other the N-word with the A at the end, which is like common slang at this point. But that was just kind of weird to me. It kind of took me out of the book for a little bit, especially because the character, as far as I'm concerned, the character that said that about Wonder was probably darker skinned than him too. So it was just kind of like a weird thing to say in the book. Um, because this book is about church people, sometimes there are cruelties within communities, a lot of slut shaming, things like that. Um, there's one scene, or there's continual references of a dog being brutalized. So if you can't take that, it was kind of small in the book, but it keeps on being brought up. And then as we get towards the end of the book, we know the real story of what happened to the dog. So if that's just a point that I know a lot of people will care about. I really wish I would have found my notes because I had a lot of good stuff on there. Let me just flip through it to see if there's anything else that I can remember. I do remember that one thing that I didn't like about this book was the ending just didn't wrap anything up for me, and it didn't have to be like a fairy tale ending, especially for everything that happened in the book. But I just felt like there were a lot of things that, you know, I needed like an extra 30 to 50 pages because there was no resolution. Even if a character is left alone or if they're left sad, this isn't a spoiler because I don't do spoilery reviews. We need to know just some information that the reader needs to know, because when you're reading a whole ass book of hundreds of pages, the reader does expect a certain payoff. So this ending kind of reminded me a lot of the ending of Ruthie Ramirez, and it reason why I'm comparing it to Ruthie Ramirez is because with both of these books I did love the entire book or most of the book, but the ending just kind of like, what was all that for? It didn't really like help. And also the pacing was okay, but I felt once we got to the end, it was kind of like, I guess I can compare it to The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby, even though I don't really like that book anymore, I used to love that book. The pacing made sense. The symbolism, it was heavy with symbolism, but towards the end, it seemed like there was a lot of rushing just to get to the point of, you know, what happened to Gatsby. So I feel like that's kind of what this ending was like. Um, yeah, I mean, like this book had like random racial stuff. Like there was this one scene where Wonder and Diamond go somewhere. I gotta be vague because I don't want to spoil it. And then Wonder randomly starts talking to this white girl and I think this black dude, but they do drugs or whatever. And then she makes a joke about how nobody's hanging inwards anymore. And I'm like, that's random. I know it's Mississippi and I know it's a white person, and some, not all white people, but white people think they could say anything. But I just felt like that was a random thing to put in the book. It's like, almost like the extreme racism had to be put in the book, sprinkled throughout to remind us where the setting was. And oh, I remembered once she started dropping those. Um, is there anything else that I didn't really like about this book? I think that was pretty much it. Now let's talk about what I did like about the book. So, the first first of all, I've been renting this from the library for weeks now, almost for like 2 months. I kept renewing it, and I didn't really start to get into it until the third week. So this was back when I was still in phlebotomy school, and that was only a month. I literally just read this one section in the book, which has like the program that explains the church's history, and I felt like this was done so well. Such a small part of the book, but it really sets you up, and this is before the prologue. It really sets you up for what you're getting yourself into. A lot of these people, because it talks about the founding of the church, a lot of these people are dead and gone and they're not characters in the book, but it tells you what has happened with the history of the church, so you can kind of catch the vibes. You can see when Reverend Sabry comes in, and you could also see what type of church it is by the type of events that it hosts. For example, and I also like this program part because it reminded me a lot of when I was a little girl, and my mom designed the programs for church because my grandfather on my mom's side used to be a pastor. But June 1930, first Sabbath service, and you could see years or decades pass before important things happen. First sermon, April 1932. Then they got the elders and the trustees, and it started to be more popular, and it was bringing it together. Then they did musicals and charities. They got new ministers, and then they did a whole lot of events that called people in. The thing that kind of got my attention when I was reading the program part was when they were talking about like a saint versus sinners potluck or charity or whatever. And originally, when I heard that title, I thought it was going to be talking about like the saints are the people who are already joined in the church, and the sinners are just like random people from the streets. So I felt like that was interesting because it let me know that this was like a hellfire type of church. And I think that was very important to know going in, because that will show us like the vindictive energies of some of the characters, or like it let me know that there was going to be a huge theme of being publicly shamed by people or losing clout or notoriety with people in the book. Another aspect of the formatting of the book, I used to be really hard about changing perspectives, but I feel like the book having the perspective from only Diamond and Priscilla was good. But just like Ruthie Ramirez, again, there were some characters, at least towards the end, to break up the monotony or to know more about those characters. I wanted to get points of views from them, because this book, it shifts between first person with Priscilla and Diamond, but it's really like, it's not third person omniscient, because if it was omniscient we would know what the hell is going on in Wonder's mind, but sometimes it takes like a third person scope as well, and that's a very ballsy thing to do, because some authors cannot do the change in perspectives well. But in the beginning, like the first 2/3 of the book, Addie, the pacing was very smooth, the story was very smooth. But once we started to get towards the middle, that's when like the weird plot devices came in. So then there were some parts of the books where it would be like a page or a page and a half of sermon notes. And these sermon notes, what they did is it kind of let you get into the like judgmental preacher mind of Reverend Savory Jr., but it also, he had a tendency, because Priscilla was the one who was writing his notes, but he was telling the sermon. So that's a very subtle way of showing the power dynamic in a relationship. And I think Addie C. Citchens did that so well, showing not telling with that aspect, their power dynamic, and also how really for a lot of patriarchal men, it's like the women behind them which are running things. And also being that Priscilla, being the wife of Sabri and the mother of Wonder, has to hold the whole family secrets while also having her own problems with like popping pills. That's her another character flaw that she has, is, and like the whole church already knows it. Like everybody knows it except for Wonder, or everybody knows except for Sabri, that she's not really happy with her life, so she pops painkillers, and it's also because of her hip. But like in the sermon notes, like something will happen in the previous chapter, and then the sermon notes sometimes will talk about one passage in the Bible, or they'll talk about multiple passages in the Bible, but it's really Priscilla, lightweight, trying to expose her family through what the, or talk about like her feelings about her family subliminally through what she puts in the notes. Like the book of Savor points, the book of Proverbs illustrates many definitions of foolishness. What are some of them? What does the Bible say about the Christian suffering fools? How does the word teach the Christian to avoid foolish behavior? The blank of the Lord is the beginning of blank. So sometimes these chapters, like they'll summarize what happened in the previous chapter, but what I also liked about this is it kind of served as a guessing game, because it would foreshadow the events that would happen in the next chapter, the upcoming chapter. And this book was a page turner. Like I said, when I was in school, I read like 2 pages. And then when I really decided to get into it, I was reading big chunks a day, like 30 pages or more a day. So I really, one pro of this book is I really like the formatting. I really like the complex characters. And I do like how the characters who you think are bitchy, or the characters who you can't stand, you start to feel for them. And the characters that you feel for, or you gave too much slack, you start to realize that they have flaws. So I love a book that has a lot of characters, but it's not overwhelming, and the characters all interact in a certain way, and the characters develop, and you find new nuances about the characters, but it's not overwhelming. So if you want to read something that's kind of S.A. Cosby-ish, that has like a ragtag group of characters and they all know each other and they all interact in interesting ways for the reader to analyze, this was a good book with that. This kind of idea of a not so woke Huxtable or Brady Bunch dynamic. I like that theme of exploring family and religion in this book, and also small town stuff, and how even in disaster, sometimes people come together. Is there anything else about this book that I really liked? Um, oh, one thing that was kind of like a love-hate thing about this book is like the syntax and the way how people talk. Because they're from Mississippi, sometimes this book would feel very literary, and I don't know if that was Addie C. Kitchen's voice or if our characters were like a mixture of witty and just talking like southern slang, like a lot of weird similes and metaphors and things like that. So sometimes because of like the mixed styles of the writing, it was hard to like understand what the characters were saying, but this book is very accessible. It's not like lofty, and it's not overly simple. I guess that's all that I really have to say. And then for my overall thoughts about this book, really a big way for me to like drop a rating in a book is the ending. The ending makes a huge difference. Sometimes I take off a whole star because of the ending. Um, Originally, I think I gave this book like a 3.5, but I don't know if it's a 4. It was done very well. It was just a lot of minor things added up together that were okay. This is definitely a book that I want to see made into maybe not so much a movie. I could see this being more so of like a show with chapters somewhere on one of those streaming websites, but I think it was done very well. I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. And I will talk more about this book in a video that I might possibly film tomorrow, which is 5-ish books that weren't necessarily perfect, but were still very enjoyable that I would recommend to people who feel like they can withstand it. Overall, I feel like Dominion by Addie C. Kitchens was, it took like this theme of let's point out the flaws of church people, but it took it to another level. It wasn't overly long, it wasn't overly complicated. It was very interesting. I also want to compare Addie C. Kitchens, like her vibe, to Brandon Taylor a little bit, in a sense that she really knows how to write her ass off when it comes to the contemporary genre. And I am looking forward to other things that she might write. I just hope that the next book that she writes is going to be a completely different swing from this, because I want it to be like a different subject matter but similar themes. Um, yeah, I would recommend this one, especially if you're like me, where you're kind of an eclectic reader and you read most genres. But if you've been reading a lot of heavy, like fem gore or manga or something, like this would be a nice one to just throw in to mix it up. And yesterday I finished Mocha, so I think what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna talk about my Mocha book in the next video. I am resetting my channel. I reset my tarot channel, and it's been going pretty well. And I've been trying to resurrect my YouTube channels for years, but now it's like things are clicking and I'm in it for the long haul this time. And I realized things that worked, things that didn't work. I'm a person that constantly changes and evolves. So, you know, some people leave, whatever. Thank you for the karmic lessons. Some people will stay no matter what you do, just because they like your content and they like you and they're coming along for the ride. So I appreciate people like that. So for the next, or maybe for the rest of this month, you might see like 3, 4, 5 max videos on my channel, but just know that once I come up with the ideas and once I start to have more free time, those posts are going to be more frequently. So 2 things that I learned that really helped with the tarot channel growing is posting on multiple social media sites, which I'm going to do for the BookTube channel, and also end screens. End screens help people to watch your content more. So thank you for staying. Thank you for watching the whole video. If you watched the whole video, the next one that I'm going to post is going to be my Mocha book review. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Follow me on all my social media platforms as I build them. And I'll see you guys in the next one.